Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be doing more low-effort content, because the video that was supposed to come out today, basically I noticed that there's some things that I don't like about it, and so it got thrown out. And also I have to rerun a bunch of stress tests for the replacement, so yeah, here we are. More low-effort content. We're going to be taking a look at Gigabyte's AM5 motherboard lineup this time. Gigabyte has quite a few boards, including some actually like kinda budget motherboards, but yeah, AM5 just in general is not very cost effective to be completely honest. So yeah, anyway, let's just get into it, starting off with the top end board, the X670e Aorus Extreme. So I do actually have a bunch of boards from Gigabyte. Actually I only have wait. I have 4. I have the Extreme, the Master, the other Master, and the Elite AX. I should eventually be getting a Tachyon when they get around to like releasing that board. I don't think that board's even on the website, which is rather annoying, but I hope they don't cancel it, because I really hope they don't cancel it, because it is possible that they might decide not to release it, just because there's not really much point in having a 1 DIMM per channel AM5 motherboard. Ryzen CPUs, the limiting factor isn't your motherboard, it's the memory controller. So, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, let's get into it. The Aorus Extreme. In my opinion, this is one of the best looking like motherboards to be released in a very long time. Most modern motherboards are really boring to look at. This one isn't, so I like that. It's still a bit too monochrome in my opinion, but oh well, like we're not gonna get any like colorful. Well, actually, there's the live mixer boards from ASRock. So yeah, we've got like 2 colorful motherboards for like modern motherboard options. Anyway, so as much as I like how this board looks, it's not actually my in terms of feature set. I'm not really a fan, and the reason of that is reasoning for that is very simple. This board has a bunch of PCIe Gen 5 switches on it, and none of them are for giving you an extra PCIe X8 slot. Basically, this board's sort of like the main reason you would buy this motherboard is because for some reason you want all of your M.2 drives connected directly to the CPU at the cost of your X16 PCIe slot over here. So actually, if we go to the motherboard manual, there's a very helpful, I think this should be the motherboard manual, right? Yeah, that's the motherboard manual. So we'll have a nice block diagram of just where all your, overpriced Gen 5 PCIe lanes are going, and it's them. It's just M.2 slots, and there's only 4 of them in total on the board. So yeah, that's not really like, as far as AM5 motherboards go, that's not really like in terms of how many M.2 slots you can get when you buy the board. I don't think this is the highest number you can get, because there's MSI boards where they give you dual X8 and an expansion card, and they have 4 M.2 slots on the board itself. So like you can do this like crazy M.2, like you can go up to basically like you can do the same thing with having like 4 M.2 drives connected directly to the CPU, and then you also have M.2 slots on the motherboard that you can connect to, that are connected to the chipset. Which is why, in my opinion, this should not be a thing. You shouldn't be taking CPU PCIe lanes and turning them into M.2 slots. That's stupid. Convert them into another PCIe slot and then include an add-in card. The board is like, this board, to be fair to Gigabyte, this board is not the most expensive X670e motherboard by a very large margin. But like it's still an expensive board. I feel like they could have included an M.2 add-in card instead of trying to squeeze all the M.2s onto the board. Wait, it's 1,000. It's not supposed to be that expensive. Oh, and it's not. Are you kidding me? The Gigabyte. Yeah, like it's supposed to be $700 when it's in stock. So it's not really like, there's way more expensive X670e boards out there, but even at this price, I feel like they could have just had dual X8 and then included an add-in card for the extra M.2 slots, but yeah, like that's just not like that's a thing MSI does, and I think Asus occasionally does it, but I don't think. No, Gigabyte has done that on some HEDT boards like X299 and Threadripper. I think they've done that, but I've never seen them do it on a mainstream motherboard, because on mainstream motherboards they just convert your PCIe lanes into M.2 slots directly on the board. So if you wanted to use them for like a capture card or a second GPU, right? You might be building a rendering system or something, especially with like a thread, like with a 7950X. Like, yeah, you might be building a rendering machine. Can't have two GPUs connected directly to the CPU on this board because the board literally doesn't do that. So, yeah, I do find that quite disappointing. Yeah, like you can see that you just kind of, yeah, because this drops your primary PCIe slot. Yeah, that's one PCIe X16. So it drops your primary PCIe slot, and then the other two PCIe slots are off of the chipsets. Anyway, so yeah, great looking board, but the feature set is like, if this is what you want your board to do, then that's great. If you want something more flexible, this is the opposite of flexible. Those PCIe lanes are dedicated to M.2 slots. Converting M.2 slots back into anything, especially when most of them live under your GPU, it's not exactly convenient. So, yeah, I'm not a this is a thing that Gigabyte has been doing for a while now. And as far as I know, like, a lot of people do actually like this for some reason, but I don't get it. Like, to me, this seems completely just where you're taking PCIe lanes, which are like you can adapt them into basically whatever you want. And you're converting them into M.2 slots, which admittedly you can still kind of convert them back into PCIe lanes, but way less convenient. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that. In terms of the power delivery, this board will power any CPU that you can put into it. Like, the thing is with X670, the 7950X just doesn't pull that much power. This board will literally power a 7950X without the VRM heatsink installed, even if you're doing like static overclocks and running Prime 95. So VRM thermals are just not a concern on higher end. Like, that's not even a high end board. The X670e Aorus Elite is like under $300. Yeah, it's $290. So you don't need an expensive board to power a 7950X. Now, in terms of voltage regulation, this board, unfortunately, is not the best. Mostly because the load line the load line on this board is really shallow, so the V-droop is like minimal, and it's very aggressive, and there's basically a bunch of undershoot even on the like droopiest LLC setting, which is kind of annoying. The good news is, if you're using PBO, this doesn't affect you, because PBO is designed to, like, the reason the load line slope is so shallow is that that's by design for the stock voltage control, like the automatic, like the dynamic voltage control that normally Ryzen has, like, that's designed to function with a very, very shallow load line. But if you're doing static overclocking, yeah, it's not great. If you're running, Y-Cruncher or something like LinPack, the voltage regulation on this board it's just not great. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I don't have hard numbers for how much worse it is, but it is worse than some of the other boards out there. Anyway, what else do we have? I mean, in terms of overclocking features, you have a postcode, voltage read points. You have the rebindable button that, like, on Intel boards, you could have safe boot with that button. On AMD boards, you can't have safe boot because AMD, like AGSA, just makes it impossible to implement a safe boot function. Like, to be fair to Gigabyte, even the safe boot button, like the dedicated safe boot button on the Gene board, also didn't work. So that's just like AMD motherboards can't have safe boot, as far as I can tell. And what else do we have? Expo XMP support. This is 6666 is very optimistic. Oh, it's one of those. Oh boy. Yeah, so this is so Gigabyte sells memory modules now. And one of the side effects of this is when they want to get some crazy memory kit onto their QVL, like when they want to max out the QVL, they just kind of make like they just sort of make themselves a special memory kit to do that with. So yeah, I don't really consider this fair. Having like 6666 on the list with a like custom, basically one-off memory kit. Um, Wait, they apparently have 6666 validated on 32 gig DIMMs. Well, that's Hynix 8i, so I guess that makes sense. Um, Other than that, we have a bunch of 6600s, which if you have an extremely good CPU, yeah, that might work. Most CPUs will not go over 60. Actually, many CPUs won't even do 6400. So yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. But the thing is, like, that's just a CPU quality thing. That's not a that's not a motherboard thing. 6200 on the other hand actually tends to work very regular, like that I would expect to actually work on basically any Ryzen CPU. But 6400, that's when it starts being like, oh, you kind of need to get lucky. And then the 6600 and the 6666, that's just like, I don't know how many CPUs they had to go through to find one that does that, but apparently it's possible. So yeah, anyway, in terms of memory support, like this isn't really any different from other high-end X670 motherboards. PCIe Gen 5, of course. You have the active OC tuner. And there's a video from Scatterbencher for overclocking the 7950X. Anyway, outstanding thermal design. It's like completely irrelevant. You can take the VRM heatsink off, and the VRM will be at like 80 degrees running Prime 95. The heatsink, like the heatsink on this motherboard, is there to look good, and look impressive. You know, gives you like having this much surface area. It sure gives you the illusion of this heatsink actually doing something for the VRM thermals. It adds a bunch of manufacturing cost, but yeah, like they could literally ship this board. Actually, they could ship basically like they could ship the Elite AX without a VRM heatsink, and I wouldn't complain about it because it runs at perfectly acceptable temperatures. Like, yeah. So the VRM heatsinks, like this is the funny thing is like VRM heatsink. The reason at one point in time motherboard VRM heatsink designs got so bad is because there was a like several generations of Intel CPUs where the VRM basically didn't matter. So you didn't really need a heatsink at all. And the VRM heatsink design at the time basically wasn't a matter of designing an effective cooling system for the VRM. It became a matter of designing an aesthetically pleasing thing that sits in the VRM area. That was the point of the VRM heatsink on like your Z87 motherboards, Z77 motherboards, Z97, to some extent X99 as well. Like it just didn't matter what the VRM heatsink actually, like, was it a good heatsink? Who knows? Doesn't matter. The VRM on those boards just doesn't run that hot because the CPUs don't pull that much current. And then we eventually, and then Z170 is another case of that. Z270 quad core 14 nanometer Intel chips, like they don't pull any power. And then eventually we started getting CPUs that actually pull a lot of power, but and you still had that sort of trend, like those like basically aesthetics heat sinks for VRMs, and it didn't work anymore because like you got your 6-core Intels, your 8-core Intel CPUs, and those things pull 200, 300 watts, and they pull it at relatively low voltages, so the VRM temperatures were actually quite, like, you'd end up with really high VRM temperatures if you didn't have a proper VRM with a proper heatsink. And so now we've got the complete opposite end where, like, motherboard manufacturers have sort of pivoted all the way into, 18 105 amp power stages with a heatsink that would probably be good enough to cool a GPU, a low-end GPU, but on a CPU that, pulls, won't even pull 300 watts. And this is on an 8-layer PCB. Like, you can literally run this board without a heatsink and it'll be just completely fine. So that's kind of the thing. Now, to be fair, there are lower-end boards where, like, a 7950X will require the VRM heatsink to exist. But, yeah, on the high-end X670e motherboards, like, yeah, I know a lot of people will look at this and go, like, oh my god, what a heatsink design. So much surface area, so many fins. It doesn't matter. The board doesn't need that heatsink. It'll never need that. Like, you'd need probably a 350 watt or 400 watt CPU before this heatsink actually starts. Well, it still wouldn't need to look like this for that, but you'd need 350 to 400 watt CPUs before you actually need some kind of heatsink on the VRM. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. But, and on the flip side, you've got the Z790 motherboards where actually the 13900K does pull so much power that even a board like this would need a VRM heatsink. So that's kind of the thing is, like, a lot of motherboards don't really reflect the CPUs that they're built for, right? Like, this thing has the power delivery worthy of a 13900K, except it's powering a 7950X. And there's a big difference between the two of those. Anyway, here's the thing. If you want a bunch of M.2 slots on your motherboard that go directly to the CPU because you're a file copying enthusiast, you're just copying hundreds of gigabytes every day, this board will be great for you. Yeah. Gigabyte's BIOS is also a lot better than it used to be for DD. Yeah, it's a lot better than the mess that they had for Z690. And they've added some pretty neat features to their BIOS to simplify things like memory overclocking to some extent. They have some memory overclock, memory timing presets now, which are kind of neat. But yeah, the only reason to buy this board is you need those M.2 slots, because for everything else it's just kind of, well, most of the cost of the board is those M.2 slots, as well as sort of the VRM heatsinks, the VRM, that kind of thing. But yeah, the PCIe Gen 5 switches are not cheap. Anyway, so that's the X670e Aorus Extreme. I really wish it had a second I wish it did dual X8. Unfortunately for me, Gigabyte's entire AM5 lineup doesn't have a single motherboard with dual X8. I am quite upset about that. Anyway, the X670e Aorus Master. So this is basically more of the same. Massive overkill VRM. They removed 2 of the power stages. Not that really makes much of a difference. Though it is now an 8-phase instead of a 18-phase. So the other board was using the 20-phase voltage controller from Renesas. This uses a 8-phase, 8+2. Yeah, 8+2 phase controller from Renesas. And so you get you get 8 phases, but with 2 power stages in each phase. So it's still 16100, you get 16105 amp power stages. And so in terms of current handling capacity, this performs the same as the Aorus Extreme does. In terms of voltage regulation, funnily enough, it also performs the same as the Aorus Extreme does. Because yeah, the Aorus Extreme does have those extra. I'm surprised that they're not advertising it, or maybe I just missed it. Did the website break? Interesting. So I figured they would advertise this, but they're not advertising the oh yeah, also we didn't even look at the rear IO, but you get, what is it? 10 USB type A ports, you got some display outputs for your iGPU, 10 gig LAN, optical out, clear CMOS, Q Flash Plus, Wi-Fi 6E, standard high-end motherboard things on the Aorus Extreme. Anyway, yeah, what I want to, I'm surprised that they're not advertising the extra SMD polymer capacitors, because that is a thing they've advertised on past motherboards. And to be fair, in certain scenarios, those capacitors can make your voltage regulation a lot better. But the funny thing is, this board and this board actually have the exact same voltage regulation performance. I've measured it with the oscilloscope. There is little to no difference between them. Or at least, with my oscilloscope, I can't measure a difference between the two boards. And that's even though that, this is an 18 phase, whereas this is a 8 phase with 16 power stages, and this has the extra polymer, SMD polymers, whereas this only uses through-hole capacitors. But the thing is, as far as I can tell, the control loop basically on both of these boards is set up the same. So, you have intercell voltage regulators for both of them. Actually, I should be saying Renesas, but so you have a Renesas VRM on both of them, and the control loop seems to be set up the same. The load line slope is the same, and so they both end up with the same sort of, if you're running static voltage, there's kind of a lot of undershoot. Even if you have the most, droopiest LLC setting. Basically, if you were thinking of, getting the Extreme because it would have better CPU better static overclocking than the Master, it doesn't. The voltage regulation on them is the same. Even though, one of them has a slightly better output filtering configuration than the other, it's just, yeah, in actual practice, there is no difference. The funny thing is, with VRM designs, there's a lot of ways to end up with the exact same results. Same thermals, same voltage regulation performance, while using completely different parts. It is actually possible to end up with the same results. So, yeah, and these two boards are sort of kind of good example of that, where it's they perform exactly the same. And in terms of thermals, the extra 2 power stages really don't make much of a difference. Though, yeah, they just don't make much of a difference. Anyway, I'm guessing you know what, let's take a look at the rear I/O on this, because this doesn't do the crazy M.2, all your M.2s connect to the CPU thing. It only has 2 M.2s connecting directly to the CPU, and then your other 2 go to the chipsets. But you still don't, you only get, X16 and then X4, X2 on the bottom. Or, yeah, X4, you get X4 by 4 and then X3 by 2. You get the multi-key, but doesn't work. You get a postcode power button. Well, I mean, the multi-key's safe boot function doesn't work. The other functions do work, but they're far less useful than safe boot, in my opinion. Anyway, let's take a look at the connectivity. So you get a ton of USB Type A on this, which I obviously like. What is that? That's 12 Type A ports. You get a 2.5 gig LAN. Oh, they downgraded to 2.5 gig. Because one of the previous Masters, the Z690 Master, had 10 gig LAN. That's kind of lame. Yeah, so really the only thing this does compared to the X670e Aorus Elite is that you get a postcode. And a better VRM. And it is actually noticeably better voltage regulation, because the Elite uses a very different VRM with unfortunately I think it has even less V-droop, or it's just the way it's configured ends up with more ultimately on the oscilloscope it performs worse. So yeah. Up to 6666. It's the same, it's the same 8-layer PCB as the Aorus Extreme, so yeah, the memory overclocking isn't going to be different. And the QVL is going to have those same 2 custom Gigabyte kits at the top of it. Yep. Oh, well, so that's the Master. Now, I guess the nice thing with the Master is that it's nice. Actually, is it nice? I don't know. I've not checked yet. Let's see. 500. I don't like it very much. Like, I can understand the, the extra cost of the PCIe switches on the Aorus Extreme. Getting that board up to $700. Also, you get like 10 gig LAN and that kind of thing. But here, I'm kind of confused as to why this should be a $500 board. Because, like, there's no like feature I can point to where it's like, oh yeah, this is really cool, this is a reason to get this board. On the Z690 Master, you had the 10 gig LAN, but here it's just kind of like, well, it has a postcode, but that's, like, there's other options for motherboards with postcodes at this price point. Like, there's a lot of options for motherboards with postcodes at this price point. So that's not really, that's not like a reason to get this board. It has an awful lot of USB Type-A ports, but there's other boards that do that. Like Gigabyte has a lot of motherboards that do that. Yeah, you get your two M.2 slots from the CPU, but that's like, I think Gigabyte does that on almost every single board they have. You get your X4. Oh, you get an extra X4 instead of just an X2 this time? That's kind of nice, I guess. But yeah, there's not really anything where it's like I have a, yeah, I can't see a reason that I would recommend this motherboard to somebody. Because like it doesn't do anything wrong. It's just like it also doesn't do anything special. Right? It's like it has a postcode. Yeah, there's other boards that do that. Gigabyte has a cheaper board that does that. The VRM is very big. Gigabyte uses like almost exactly the same VRM on a B650 board, which costs significantly less. Yeah, I don't like it comes with a back plate. I think even the B650 board comes with a back plate. So, yeah, I unfortunately can't think of a single reason that I would recommend this board. And you don't even get the clear CMOS button in the rear I/O. So, yeah, I can't think of a single reason that I would recommend this board to somebody. It's not bad, but like, it's $500 and it doesn't really do anything that special. Like, you can get a lot of VRM on other motherboards. You can get the exact same connectivity on other motherboards for less money. You can get a postcode for less money. You can get 2.5, like every motherboard has 2.5 gig LAN. That's not really like, that's not really a feature. That's the default. Like, it's just expected. You don't get points for that. Like, yes, I'm pretty sure the 2.5 gig LAN probably costs more than the 1 gig does, but it doesn't add any. It's not like extra special functionality. PCIe Gen 5 on a single X16 slot is standard for AM5. Like, yeah, this is probably the most disappointing master motherboard from Gigabyte in quite a while, in my opinion. Like, in terms of feature set, compared to some of the other entries in the series, this is just kind of like, eh. You get an X670e chipset, I guess, but there's other boards that do that. So let's move on to a motherboard that makes significantly more sense because it's significantly cheaper. The X670e Aorus Elite AX. Wait, there's already a revision 1.1? Gigabyte what? Oh, it's less ugly. Is that it? Eight-layer PCB. Same power stages. Actually, I think this is uglier than the other one. Yeah, I kind of prefer this one. But let's figure out why there's two of them, because I can't. And I did mess around with memory overclocking on the revision 1.0 board, and it was fine. Like, that was actually one of the first boards I tested memory overclocking with, and I had 6400 working on it just fine, at least when I still had a 7950X that did 6400. But that 7950X died, so, yeah. Oh, I see what the difference... Okay, I've figured out sort of what I guess Gigabyte wants the feature for the Master to be, is you get two M.2 slots connected to the CPU, while this only has one M.2 slot connected directly to the CPU. I don't really see that as a reason to spend $200 more on your motherboard, though. And we still haven't figured out why there's two different versions of this board already. It looks the same. Oh, I guess they gave it a bigger M.2 heatsink and made it uglier. Yeah, I don't like this new VRM heatsink. It is just uglier. And even the chipset heatsink. Well, I'm glad they sent a revision 1.0. Yeah, because I get the better looking one. Unfortunately, both of these boards, like if you're going to be doing static CPU overclocking, I would not be getting an Aorus Elite. Now, again, on auto, it's fine in terms of voltage regulation. But yeah, if you're manually overclocking, this VRM's voltage regulation is really... Well, so far, it's the worst thing I've measured, other than the Aorus Extreme, when you completely max out the LLC, which is, you shouldn't max out the LLC. Actually, every motherboard ever, if you max out the LLC completely, the voltage regulation goes straight to hell. There's nothing that can really be done about that. You should not do that. So... Yeah, but this board, even when you have the like droopiest LLC setting that it comes with, you still have not like the voltage regulation is still not great. Actually, maybe that's the difference between the revision 1.1 and the 1.0, is that they might have changed the VRM configuration a bit. Because I don't know when the 1.1 came out. Actually, let's take a look at the specs page, because I'm kind of wondering, like, is it going to be identical? Oh no! the list changed a bit. Wait, how far do I have to scroll down? Oh, now it's the same. Yeah, it's the same board. They just changed the heat sinks. I wonder if it's because they like ordered a bunch of one type of heatsink for like B650 boards or something, and now they're like, oh wait, let's put this on the X670 one as well. It's probably it. It could also be that they tweaked something on the VRM, but I think it might just be a case of like, well, we ordered a bunch of heatsinks that, like, we don't use this heatsink on any... Yeah, I don't think they use that heatsink on any other board, do they? Or, no, they do on the B650 Elite. Huh. Okay, so I am very confused as to why there's two versions of the Elite now. You do get a multi-key on this board, and you do get a power button, which is kind of nice. You don't get a post code, which is unfortunate. You do get a clear CMOS button. Like, the funny thing is, like, this board has, like, most of your test bench features, except for a post code. So... Yeah. This is a... Like, the thing is, you only get 4 SATA ports on this. You do get a ton of USB Type-A, which obviously I'm a fan of. Oh, you don't get optical audio out, so... Yeah, that's... Like, if you care about that, that's obviously a downside to this board. So... This board is a... I don't know, like, the issue is, like, the X670 chipset in and of itself, to me, doesn't really make a ton of sense, because the only thing it really enables is a bunch of connectivity, right? Like you can have more stuff connected to the chipsets. That's the whole point of X670. And like neither of these two boards are particularly like your rear IO is very, very solid, but then like you only get 4 SATA ports on them. That's like B650 motherboards. That's like, yeah, that's literally B650 motherboard levels. In terms of M.2 slots, yes, you get 4 of them, but I'm pretty sure even B650 boards have 4 M.2 slots a lot of the time, so that's not really much of an achievement. What do they claim for XMP support? It's 66. Yeah, it's the same memory topology. It's the same, like it's an 8-layer PCB again. So, yeah, I am very confused about the X670 chipset in general, because it's like you have really expensive motherboards that aren't really that impressive in terms of feature set. Right? Like this is still a $300 or almost $300 board, and yet the feature set really isn't. Like, it's just not that impressive, right? It's not even doing PCIe Gen 5. Not that that's very, like, PCIe Gen 5 right now isn't really that useful, but it is worth noting, like, you don't even get that. You get PCIe Gen 5 on just the M.2 slot, not even the X16. So, yeah, I am very... I'm a bit confused as to... Wait, did they like significantly upgrade the heat sinks? I just noticed. Oh, that's why there's a revision 1.1. Yeah, I completely missed it. Like this M.2 heatsink is basically flat, whereas this one's sticking way up off of the board. So I'm pretty sure this is just a heatsink redesign and not, or yeah, like different heatsinks, not actually anything else changed about the board. So yeah, like if you like the feature set of either of those, like those are fine boards as long as you're not doing like static CPU overclocking, because again, the voltage regulation just even with the droopiest LLC, like it's significantly behind the Master and the Extreme, and those are already not particularly amazing. So yeah, anyway, let's take a look at the B650e Aorus Master, which, in my opinion, is probably Gigabyte's best AM5 motherboard right now, at least if you're into overclocking, because you get the same VRM as you get on the X670 Master, but you get to pay significantly less for it, which, is, like, if you can pay less for the same thing, that's a good thing. So... yeah, the Master is, $500, and for $150 less, you can get the exact same VRM. Well, actually, there's like a slight change in what inductors they're using, but it doesn't affect the performance. So this board is, like, in terms of overclocking, like, it's basically the same thing. It's not even basically the same thing. To me, it's the same thing as the X670e Aorus Master, because the voltage regulation's the same. Actually, like, you can see it's the same 105 amp power stages. It's the same 8-phase VRM with 2 power stages in parallel per phase. It's on an 8-layer PCB, so the heat, like, the PCB is the same. Well, actually, is it? I think it might be. Yeah, ready low loss PCB. I'm going to assume that's the same PCB substrate. You get a worse VRM heatsink, which isn't relevant because neither of these boards, like this VRM doesn't need a VRM heatsink. So the fact that the heatsink is somewhat worse just doesn't matter. You get cheaper thermal pads, which again just doesn't matter because it doesn't need a heatsink. I don't think you get the backplate, which really doesn't matter that much. Like, backplates are nice. They make the board more robust, but they don't really affect the performance. Oh no, you do get the backplate. Yeah, so you even get the backplate. Like, I see no reason to get the X670e Master unless you really need your 6 SATA ports, because this, unfortunately, only has 4 of them. Which yeah, that's my main complaint for B650 motherboards is kind of the they don't tend to have many SATA ports, though these days most people use M.2 drives. I'm very weird with my insistence on using SATA drives. Well, there's it's not really I'm insistent on using SATA drives, it's just I don't buy drives that like that frequently, and a lot of the time when I'm buying a drive, I just want the most amount of capacity for the least amount of cost, and at the time that I was buying drives in the past, it was always SATA. So, um, yeah. Um, Also, I find it more convenient to not have things attached directly to the motherboard. Which is why I have like really like if you've some people might have noticed that I like never use the stock mount like the intended mounting hardware for a lot of the heat sinks that I use, because I just want like the easiest to unmount and mount heatsink hardware. So it's like I've sort of fiddled with it for every single heatsink that I use regularly. It's just like I don't use the standard mounting hardware because it takes too long to use. um, Anyway, like it takes too long to install. Anyway, you get a postcode on this. You get the multi-key, which again, unfortunately, doesn't work as well as you'd hope. You get a power button. Let's check out the rear I/O. A ton of USB ports again. So we've got what? That's 4, 8, 10, 12. Yeah, so you get 12 Type A's. You get the clear CMOS on the back. This is actually just a better rear I/O than the Aorus, the X670 board. You get your 2.5 gig LAN again, Wi-Fi 6E, of course. You get your optical audio output as well. You even get the stupid M.2 configuration from the X670e Aorus Extreme, which I am really upset about on this board, because if this board had dual X8 and it was $350, it would be amazing. Like, that would make it absolutely amazing, because as far as I know right now, the cheapest motherboard on AM5 that does dual X8 is around $500. This board has the hardware to do dual X8. It's just that Gigabyte used it to make a bunch of M.2 slots. This could have had dual X8 for $350. That would have been incredible. It would have been literally the cheapest motherboard with dual X8 by like a 100 and like by basically $150 or $100. Like that would be really cool if you needed dual X8 PCIe slots connected to the CPU. Unfortunately, Gigabyte prefers connecting all your M.2 drives to the CPU. So, yeah, which like actually like in so like this is potentially actually a downside, like if you want a bunch of M.2 drives but don't want to, go from X16 to X8. Which is just another reason that like doing what Gigabyte does with the M.2 slots, in my opinion, is like, to be fair, like MSI has also done this. Except I think MSI had a bunch of extra switches so that you could actually choose if the M.2 slots were connected directly to the CPU or the chipset, which admittedly adds a bunch of extra, like adds even more cost to your, expensive PCIe lanes, but at least you had the option to not connect your slow M.2 drives to the CPU, because that's the thing, is if you're buying like a bunch of slow M.2 drives, that you would usually you wouldn't care if they go to the chipset or the CPU because they're slow. It doesn't matter. On this board, they always go to the CPU. You don't get a choice, which I think is really stupid. And that's also true for the X670e Aorus Extreme, right? Like, it's just like, these are connected to the CPU permanently. Which, yeah, that's... Actually, I think it's just one extra CPU connection. Yeah, which makes it worse. Oh wait, no, it is all of them. I misread the block diagram. It is actually all of them. So, yeah, no, I think this is stupid. Motherboard vendors should stop doing this and just give us proper X8 slots. And yeah, like they should just give us proper X8 slots. I think Asus is also doing something really convoluted on one of their B650 boards where it's like, yeah, you get an like you get a bunch of M.2 slots and then your PCIe lines are all weird. Um, but anyway, in Gigabyte's AM5 lineup, I consider this sort of the best option because you get the same VRM as like, the X670e Master, which has the same voltage regulation performance as the Aorus Extreme. So you have literally, like, in terms of static CPU overclocking, this board is just as good as the $700 Aorus Extreme. You get the same stupid M.2 configuration as the Aorus Extreme. Admittedly, some people like it that way, but I think it's stupid. You get a postcode. You don't get voltage read points, which I don't really consider that much of a loss. Like, the thing is, the voltage read points just mean you don't have to, like, stab the voltage regulator directly, but, like, you can always just take your multimeter probe and stab the inductor for the relevant voltage regulator if you want to get a, direct voltage measurement. Admittedly, you're obviously not going to get, like, power, like, you're not going to be accounting for the voltage drop across the power plane by doing that, but most of the time, if you're, probing voltage read points like that, it's because you want to see if a voltage is present or if it's roughly where it's supposed to be, not because you really care about having the highest level of accuracy, because most voltage read points also aren't really connected, like, they're usually somewhere in the power plane. They're not, optimized to be the highest level of voltage measurement accuracy. That's not really what they're for. They're just so you can keep an eye on the voltages in a convenient way. So, yeah, as much as I've complained about the M.2 slots on this board, and how much cooler it would have been if it had dual X8, like, imagine that, $350 to get dual X8 on AM5, like, it would, amazing. But no, you get a bunch of M.2 slots instead. I do consider this kind of the best board Gigabyte has for AM5 if you're into overclocking, because you get the same memory topology as the high-end boards, you get the same VRM performance as the high-end boards, and you get it at a significantly lower price point. So what's not to like, right? And you also get the postcode. So, yeah, you know what's funny? They originally did this stupid thing with the M.2 slots on the B550 Master, and I complained about it then, and yeah, like, well, I have managed to, like, Gigabyte, like, the number of Type A USB ports on Gigabyte motherboards has significantly increased since I've started making, like, videos about motherboards. But evidently, the one thing I can't change is the fact that Gigabyte likes to use PCIe switches to make M.2 slots. That's just that's just not going to go away. Which I mean, I guess if most people prefer that to having to use an adapter card, I guess fair enough. Anyway, is there anything else really worth pointing out about this board? Not really. Yeah, I don't really think there's anything else to point out here. Like, this is just kind of, like, this is an X670e Master, but at like $150 less. Or actually, the better way to put this is an X670e Aorus Extreme for half the price, without the 10 gig LAN. That's it. You lose the 10 gig LAN, and that's all you really lose. Because everything else is basically the same. So, and that's pretty cool, because instead of, buying this board, you can buy this, and it functionally the same. So, yeah, and that's like the main reason I don't understand why the X670 chipset exists. And Gigabyte's sort of the best example of it, because a lot of the other motherboard vendors are much more, how do I put this? Much better at, like, cutting off features on their motherboards as they go through the product stack. Whereas Gigabyte has this weird tendency to just kind of make a board that does everything at, like, Well, actually, they did this with B550 as well. They had the B550 Master, where that board, unfortunately, that board is not really like, I wouldn't recommend that board. Just the cheaper boards from Gigabyte on B550 are actually better than that board in many ways that we're not going to get into right now. But um, yeah, like Gigabyte has this tendency of just like putting out B series boards for AM5 that do everything their high end boards do, except like you might not have as many SATA ports or something. You know, like really minor things, unless you want the 10 gig LAN. But the thing is, you can get 10 gig LAN cards for like $100. So, you know, you can buy your $350 board, use one of the chipset PCIe lanes with a 10 gig LAN card, and you're just back up to the price. You're still below the price of the X670e Aorus Master. And then if you want more SATA ports, you could actually convert that last PCIe slot into some extra SATA ports, maybe. And you're probably still going to be, like, you're just going to match the price of the Aorus Extreme while getting, like, the feature set of the, I mean, match the price of the Master while getting the feature set of the Extreme. So, yeah, Gigabyte's motherboard lineup is kind of silly in that way, where it's like, yeah, there's the B650 Master, and if you don't like, and that's kind of, I don't know why you'd really consider anything else. Then we get the Aorus Extreme, Aorus Elite. They both start with E. It's the same thing, right? Which seems to be the same board as the X670e Elite, because we've got the same VRM on the same 8-layer PCB, same VRM heatsink. Similarly cut down rear I/O, where it's like you still get a lot of Type A ports, but your audio is cut down a bit and you get 2.5 gig LAN. In terms of M.2 slots, you get one from the CPU and then two from the chipset. Yeah, it looks like just two from the chipset. So you don't get four M.2 slots anymore. I'm going to check the manual for that. Actually, we could probably just go through the specs page, couldn't we? Wait, no, you get two from the CPU, one from the chipset. Cool. How much is this board supposed to cost? $220. This is like almost the exact same feature set as the X670 board, except I think you're missing an M.2, like you don't get a fourth M.2 slot. Yeah. Oh, you also don't have like the power button, the multi-key is, yeah, you still get the multi-key, so you still get a reset switch, like reset button, but you don't get the power button, you don't get the clear CMOS button. Not that, like, having an internal clear CMOS button, in my opinion, really does anything, because, like, it's internal. You still need to open the case in order to reach it, and kind of defeats the purpose of it being a button at that point, right? It's not exactly convenient. It's the same VRM. Man, Gigabyte must be, like, hell-bent on not selling any X670 boards, because, like, they just have B650 boards that do basically the same thing for, like, way cheaper. Yeah, like, I knew about the B650e Master for a while, but I didn't realize that this was going to be the whole lineup doing this. Because, like, yeah, it's an 8-layer PCB, it's the same VRM. Like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if on a very large portion of this board is like the same thing as the X670 board. They just changed the part with the chipset. I wouldn't be surprised if the top half of this board was like a copy paste of the X670 board. Because it's still using the 8-layer PCB. It's using the exact same VRM. Same memory topology. You do get troubleshooting LEDs. Yeah, you get troubleshooting LEDs. You don't get a postcode, unfortunately. So, yeah, and you get like four. Wait, no, the X670e Elite also only has. I mean, X670 Elite only has 4 SATA ports as well. So, like at this point, I'm really questioning why do that. Like, why does this board exist? Like, I need to read the specs for the way that diagram is labeled is super hard to read. Okay, you get one from M2A CPU, M2B CPU, and you get M2C chipset, M2D chipset. Okay, so there's 4 M.2 slots on this one, whereas this one only has 3. That's not really much of a loss. And at least in my opinion, that's not really much of a difference considering there's $100, price tag difference. So yeah, this board's cool. Again, I wouldn't recommend this VRM for static overclocking, but if you're just like doing PBO, like it's gonna work fine, just fine. Oh, and there's a non-Wi-Fi version if you want it to be even cheaper. I think the non-Wi-Fi version is probably gonna be kind of like hard to find. Because like sometimes they'll just like not supply the slightly cheaper version of boards, right? Because like, yeah, well they have the option to like usually the Wi-Fi adds like $20 to the price, so there's a possibility that you might see the Aorus Elite for like $200 and the Elite AX for 220. And we get the X670 Gaming X. Am I going to be questioning why this exists? Oh, of course I'm going to be questioning why this exists. I like the look. This looks nice. Like I like how this board looks. This is a VRM we haven't seen before. 70 amps more power stage. I think this is probably the same thing that this is going to be Renaissance, I bet. Yeah, I bet this is Renaissance. Or maybe it isn't. Actually, I have no idea what VRM this is, but this is on a 6-layer PCB. Oh boy, what does that do to the memory support? Yeah, 6400. That's actually decent. And questionable. Oh no, they have 6400 validated. Cool. Yeah, and it's not just like some special Gigabyte kits that it's validated on. Like we've got ADATA and G-Skill. Yeah, so it should do at least 6200. How's the rear I/O then? Connectivity. It's good. Yeah, so I guess they just like ditched 2 PCB layers. What did that do to the price though? We don't know. Well, considering that the Elite is what, like 290, this probably going to be like 250? Yeah, I think something like that. It'll probably be like 250. This, however, probably does actually need the VRM heatsink because the lower PCB layer count means that the PCB itself is less effective at dissipating heat. How many M.2 slots do we get? Okay, we're just going to go to the specs for this. No, you got 4. So why does the X670 Elite exist? I'm very confused. You get troubleshooting LEDs? You still get a power button and a clear CMOS button. Like this is literally an Elite with 2 PCB layers removed and a different VRM. If this is Renaissance based though, because the Elite uses Infineon parts. If this uses Renaissance, this might have better voltage regulation. If this is like a downcosted version of the VRM that's on the B650e Master and the X670 Master, this might actually have better voltage regulation because the power stages don't affect the voltage regulation. They just affect the like VRM thermals. Yeah, but we can't tell which parts it is from this photo, which is kind of annoying, but oh well. Yeah, so this is an interest. So I guess if you just want X670 for all the M.2 slots, this is a really good option. Though the memory overclocking on that board is going to be weaker because, 6-layer PCB. What else do we have? So that's the Gaming X. We have a Pro AX Aorus. Why is there so many SKUs? This doesn't have a postcode, but it does have a power button. That just seems really dumb. 90 amp power stages. Yeah, okay, that just doesn't matter. 8-layer PCB, but like Gigabyte needs to stop doing this. Their ports are too similar. Like on one hand, I feel like what I'm seeing here is an B650e Master with a bunch of stuff cut off, right? Like there's this blank spot where the postcode used to be. It's not suspicious at all. So it makes sense that like it's really easy for Gigabyte to just have a bajillion SKUs because it's like, well, we use the same PCB and we just cut parts off, cut things off of it, which is good. Like I think that's a good thing, because the more different PCB designs you have, like the worse it like the more potential for one of them to have like the more times the PCB get like the more different PCBs you have, the more potential there is for something like one of them has the memory topology screwed up for some reason that, might happen or something like that. So sort of using the same PCB and just removing features, I approve of that very strongly. Or just replacing the power stages with slightly weaker power stages. Yeah, totally cool with me. Also cheaper capacitors, but they're polymers. It doesn't matter. Like they all perform like that's kind of the neat thing with polymer capacitors is they all really do perform basically the same. Unless you like, or it's not so much about who makes them, it's like what spec you buy. So, yeah. Anyway, so 90 amp power stages instead of the 105s, which just isn't going to affect the thermals basically at all. Memory support is the same because it's the same 8-layer PCB. The VRM heatsink is probably not actually necessary. The rear I/O is... It looks empty, but this is still... What is it? Like 11 Type A ports. You still get your 2.5 gig LAN. You still get your optical out. Wait, doesn't this have more USB ports? Get the feeling this has more USB ports. Yeah, it does. Wait. No, it does. Wait. What? Oh, one of the display outputs went missing. 11. Oh, I can't count. This is also 11. I don't know why I said 13. Yeah, so you get 11 Type A's on both of these. This doesn't have the optical out, which, again, like if that's something you care about, then yeah, that's pretty significant. You got a front, yeah, you got an internal Type-C header. So basically, if you want slightly, like if you really want the optical output and a better VRM, you'd get the Pro instead of the Elite. We're going to have to check, like, let's check the M.2s. M2A, M2B, M2C. So you don't get 4 of them, you just get 3. Yeah. How much does that board cost? $260. That's kind of expensive, but it is kind of just like a straight upgrade from the Elite in terms of like VRM features. Like you get slightly better, very, very, like if you care about having an optical output in the rear I/O, you get that. That's the only real difference. The power button is just kind of like that's like, I mean, yeah, it makes the board more expensive, but like it's not really that big a, it's not really much of like, that's not really much of a feature where I'd be like, yeah, that justifies the extra cost. Wait, the PCIe slot layout seems a bit worse, actually. Yeah, I mean, they're still X1, I think, on both of these. Oh, wait a minute. You couldn't put a 10 gig... Wait a minute. I might have said something that doesn't work. I might have said something that doesn't work. Where is it? Expansion slots. Oh no, it is X4. It's 4.0 by 4. So yeah, you can put a 10 gig LAN card in that. But on this, it's 4.0 X4 again. And the Elite has... Where are they? You got X16 PCIe 3.0 by 1. Okay, so you get more PCIe on this board. Okay, so yeah, this is actually kind of a, like, that's actually a potentially a significant difference depending on if you plan to run a capture card or you want 10 gig LAN or something. Like, you need that X4 slot for that kind of thing. Like, you don't really have a choice unless you want to use your GPU PCIe slot for that. Which, if you don't have a GPU, like, fair enough. Or if you just have a GPU that you're using for display output, you can put the GPU on an X1 slot, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't have any PCIe bandwidth because you're just using it for display output. If you're building like a workstation or something, where you don't care about GPU performance. So, yeah, like this board, this is also a good board in terms of feature set. Like, I can see use cases for this that would justify, the cost increase from this to the Elite. I mean, from the Elite to this. And it's not like Gigabyte is doing some crazy functionality cuts anywhere. I mean, I wish it had a postcode, but if this had a postcode, I'd be telling you about how you should buy this instead of buying the Master. Right? Like that's the whole, like, yeah. There's a very good reason why postcodes are getting rare. It's to force people who are into overclocking to spend more on their boards. So, like, you can get some, like, add-on cards that'll do postcode readouts, but the unfortunate thing is they don't work, especially on modern motherboards. Like, they don't necessarily work. So that's rather unfortunate. Anyway, so we've done the Gaming X, we've done the Elite, we've done the Pro AX. We get an MATX motherboard. There's a MATX Elite board. So, is it good? VRM is 12 plus 2 plus 1. So this actually needs a VRM heatsink. That's, it's not just for aesthetics anymore. 60 amp power stages, 8-layer PCB. That's cool. I was not expecting that this would still have an 8-layer PCB. That's actually really cool. How's the rear I/O on this? Oh, wait. Man, I hate these overly animated websites. Oh, you even get optical. This is better than the ATX Elite. Is it cheaper than the ATX Elite? It would not surprise me if it was. Wait, did I close all my... Oh, no. Okay, AM5, Gigabyte. B650M Elite AX. Yeah, it's 190. And it's just... I mean, to be fair, if you have a giant 4090... right? Which isn't completely stupid. Like a 7700X on this board and a 4090, like, knock yourself out. You don't, like, your GPU can't, your GPU has no way of knowing if the PCIe slot that connects directly to the CPU is on a motherboard with a B650 chipset or an X670 chipset. So, your $2,000 GPU can't get offended at the fact that you're putting it on a $200 motherboard. Fortunately for us. NVIDIA doesn't sell licenses for being able to run a 4090 like they do for SLI. Like, if you've ever wondered why there's, like, specific, like why SLI is, like, a feature that you don't see on motherboards anymore, but you do see Crossfire as a feature, it's because SLI requires a license that NVIDIA, like you have to pay NVIDIA for, as far as I know. So yeah, luckily NVIDIA doesn't sell 4090 licenses, so your 4090 will work on any motherboard that has an X16, well, even an X1 slot. It's just I wouldn't really recommend that if you care about performance. Um, but the issue is, like, if you do put your 4090 in this board, this PCIe slot is probably going to be non-functional, as in you're not going to be able to fit anything into that PCIe slot anymore. And even if you could, because you had, say, a 3-slot 4090 instead of a, like, 3.5 or a 4-slot card, you probably wouldn't want to because you'd be choking off airflow to the heatsink. So, yeah. It's the main downside to an MATX board like this is that, you know, if you're using a big GPU, that PCIe slot down there doesn't, you can't really access it. Also, obviously, you're not going to get anywhere near as many M.2 slots on this board. But if you don't care about that, like, you still get your 4 SATA ports, you still get your troubleshooting LEDs, there's the multi-key. The VRM should, like, I wouldn't be surprised if this should power a 7950X just fine. It's not that hard to power. It's still on an 8-layer PCB. It's got a substantial VRM heatsink. Like, this is basically the same heatsink you have on the X670 Elite. So the fact that they've somewhat downgraded the VR, like, at this point, it's kind of significant, the amount of downgrades the VRM has gotten, right? Weaker power stages, less. It's not that big a difference. 70 to 60, and we're going from 14 to 12. It's probably not much of a difference, actually. So yeah, this should still power a 7950X just fine. And it kind of does everything. Like, this is a really nice MATX board. Yeah, like the only complaints you could have for this board are directly due to it being an MATX board, as in it's just not big, so you can't have a lot of space between your PCIe slots. Arguably, what they could have done is they could have put the, like, chipset slot above the CPU slot, and then you could have, you know, but then some cases wouldn't fit your GPU, and that would cause issues. Also, running the Gen 5 lanes that far is probably not the best idea. Like, there's a reason why that X16 slot lives right next to the CPU. And actually, it's not even Gen 5 on this, is it? It's Gen 4. Which, incidentally, your 4090 doesn't use Gen 5, so, you know, that doesn't matter. And the 7900X also doesn't use Gen 5, so Gen 4 is perfectly fine for at least the near future of GPUs. So I'm really liking this. Yeah, like, it has the same memory support because it's on an 8-layer PCB. I would, like, again, I would be very surprised if the top half of this board wasn't basically a copy-paste of one of the more expensive boards, and then it just slightly fiddled with the VRM configuration. So this is a really cool board. Like, it's under $200, and it's good. I wonder how much it costs in the UK. B650M. Ugh. Ugh. Oh man, that is quite the price jump. Please tell me it's just like one of the. No, oh man, it goes up to 280. Oh whoa, we're getting screwed. I'm getting, well, I mean, I don't have to buy Gigabyte boards, so I'm not getting screwed. But we in the UK are getting screwed on that. That's awful. But yeah, this is actually for like $190. This is a lot of motherboard, except for the part where it's not ATX. And you do only get 2 M.2 slots because there's just not enough space. Am I right about that? You get both of them are from the CPU though. So if that's something you care about, you still get to keep that part. That's kind of neat. So yeah, this is a really cool board. I mean, if this had a postcode, there'd be very little reason to get anything else, in my opinion. Even without the postcode, there's not much reason to get anything else. Oh, and they even have a B650e Aorus Pro AX. Okay, now I'm interested to see how they managed to differentiate these two, because this already seems like a very, very solid MATX B650 board. Like, how did they squeeze another SKU between, or like, how did they get a board above that? Okay, so we've got slightly better power stages. That just that's not going to make a difference. There's more RGB, but that doesn't improve performance, so who cares? What else do we get? You get a Gen 5 M.2 slot and a Gen 4 M.2 slot. Okay, cool. You get the add-on card connector still, which as far as I know, I'm pretty sure this is for Thunderbolt cards. Yeah, I have no idea. It's the same rear I/O, isn't it? Like, now I'm getting suspicious of like the rear I/O is the one place where I was like, okay, that's probably where it's cut down, right? But now we need to pull up the manual because the manual won't like the website might have typos. That does happen quite frequently with motherboard manufacturers, that there's mistakes on the website, like in the promotional materials on the website. But the manual is the manual. It can't really have mistakes in it. That would be really bad. Wait, B650. They are sharing the manual because the boards are so similar. Wait a minute. That means they have to have the same loadout of connectors. Yeah. It's the same board. What? Why? And personally, I think the Pro, like the Elite, looks better because the RGB is just kind of... Like, it's the same board. It's literally the same board. Oh, whoa. Okay, well, that's really cool. So, yeah, okay, B650. You know what? I'm going to see if I can get a review sample of that board because that board seems really, really cool. I want to actually test it because while I'm pretty sure I already know how it's going to perform, like I've made like guesstimates at Gigabyte boards in the past and then ended up like well, sometimes actually surprisingly impressed and sometimes surprisingly disappointed. Um, and like I've been impressed by like cheap boards and disappointed by the expensive ones sometimes. So yeah, I do want to test this because this looks really, really good for what it is. Like, yeah. Anyway, let's take a look at the B650 Aero G. There's no point looking at the Elite AX because it's just the Elite with Wi-Fi, isn't it? Yeah, it's literally just the Elite with Wi-Fi. Okay, let's take a look at the Aero, and I already don't like it because the Aero series normally, like these are supposed to be like the creator boards, and they'd normally have, or like workstation boards, and they'd normally have the dual X8, but this we can very clearly see does not have dual X8. So I'm already upset about that. Actually, am I right about that? I'm almost 99% certain this doesn't do dual X8. Nope, it's X4. Um, okay, let's scroll through. Let's see what this does. Wait, Vision Link. Simplify your connections. Did they just slap a Thunderbolt on here and they just can't call it Thunderbolt? Because Gigabyte has done that in the past. Get 2.5 gig LAN. Get a Type-C display port. So that, as far as I know, is basically Thunderbolt functionality, right? I don't really keep up with high-speed I/O. But this looks like a Pro AX where they've just fiddled with the rear I/O portion of the board a bit. How much does it cost? Oh, actually, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's $10 more. So it's literally just a Pro AX that they fiddled with the rear I/O. This web page is even more obnoxious than the other ones. There's no motherboard here. Please, I just want to see the board. Well, this is actually a nicer visualization than some of the other ones. Aesthetic cooling design. You've just made the heatsink from the Pro silver. Okay, so this... Wait, key features. And then they just put a list like this. Okay, I really don't like this board's page. This is actually just worse. So I think the main reason you would go for this is Vision Link, DisplayPort alternate mode with USB power delivery. Yeah, so this really looks like this is just a B650 Pro AX with the Vision Link thing slapped onto it. Which, if you want that, that's cool, and it's not even like a big price premium. It's you know, $10 more. But yeah, okay, not really my kind of board. Then we got a B650M Gaming X AX. Oh no, the PCB is brown. I like the designs they have on the heatsinks on these. Like the VR, yeah, the VRM heatsink on this board looks cool. The rest of the board not so much. 6 plus 2 plus 1. This might do a 7950X, like barely. Yeah, 60 amp power stages. It might, like a stock 7950X, because here's the thing, the stock 7950X has a 160 amp current limit, so it cannot pull more than that. And the power limit is 230 watts, so it's not even like it can pull it at like super high voltage or something. 1.43 volts is kind of high. But it should still... Let's pull up that calculator again. 26 amps. On a 6-layer PCB. How's the VRM laid out? So they've got 4 phases here, 2 phases here. This might work. It's probably not going to run very cool, but I don't think it'll be at the point of like thermal throttling constantly. Because they are distributing the heat around the board, you know, somewhat. And if you have airflow over this, it'll actually run just fine. Like this is, like, fun fact, the Z390 ITX Z390i Pro from Gigabyte had a 6-phase VRM. And I ran, I think, a 9900K at like 250 watts on that board. And that's an ITX board. The VRM heatsink on that thing is a joke. It's literally like an aluminum just right angle bracket like it literally just goes up and over the rear IO, and that's it. Like there's no surface area on that. One of the power stages doesn't even have a heatsink at all because there just wasn't space for it. And that board, like if you give it enough airflow, it'll run a 9900K at like over 200 watts. So based on that, I would think that this can probably do a 7950X. It won't be running very cool, but like we've got substantial heat sinks on here. The power stages are actually better than significantly better than the ones on the ITX board I just mentioned. So yeah, I don't overclocking is pretty much out of the question, I'd say, on this, but it should actually still run a 7950X. Especially if you have airflow over the heatsinks, it really should handle a 7950X. If it doesn't, then yeah, that would be like that would be that would be quite an issue, but like this should deal with it. This should deal with a 7950X. What else should we look at? Let's check out the connectivity. Decent number of USB ports. I mean, it's a bit low. They've prioritized display outputs for some reason. There's 3 of those. I think this is the first board we've seen from Gigabyte where they have 3 display outputs. And only 7 USB Type A's, but you do still get 2.5 gig LAN. Q Flash is still present. You get a PS2 port, Wi-Fi 6E. You don't get an optical audio output. You get X16 and X1. You get 2 M.2 slots. I'm guessing they're both directly connected to the CPU again. Because it's not like they're using the CPU PCIe lanes for anything else, are they? Oh, wait, you get 1 M.2 slot. Wait, no, 2. Oh, because they're not like... Yeah, I was looking for the, like, M2A, M2B labeling, but no, it's 2 M.2s directly from the CPU. Yeah, because Gigabyte doesn't tend to do anything with the extra M.2, like the extra PCIe lanes that you get on the CPU, so that makes sense. Realtek 2.5 gig. Like, honestly, this doesn't look completely terrible. I don't know how much it costs, though, but considering that there's the B650M Elite is at, what, like 190? That board has to be at, like... Well, it has to be less than that. Oh, it's not on PC Part Picker here yet. I wonder if we have it in the UK. No, we don't. Okay. Does it still have troubleshooting LEDs? Yeah, look, kind of struggling to see them. Oh, I don't think it does. Well, that sucks. You do still get the multi-key. And you can really clearly see the, like, shield over the memory traces, right? Because, like, this is just all blank, whereas you can see the traces everywhere else. Get a single 8-pin. Yeah, I'd like, the overclocking a 7950X on this is not an option, well, here's the thing. If you point a Delta fan at the VRM, you might even get away with overclocking a 7950X, but not ideal. Definitely not ideal for overclocking a 7950X. But at the same time, this doesn't look like a completely, like, it doesn't look like a completely terrible motherboard. Yeah. Anyway, moving on, we've got the B650M DS3H, which is like a cheaper version of the board we saw before. It's a lot uglier, and the heat sinks are smaller, but I'm kind of wondering, wait, does this have the same thing where the manual is shared between them? Wait for it. Yes, it is. Yeah, because it's the same board. So it has the same feature set, and what did they downgrade? Where's the cost cutting? Still the same VRM. Same 6-layer PCB. So I guess it's just like the heatsinks that got cost optimized to a smaller size. Like, they're still present. We haven't reached the point of the motherboard with no VRM heatsinks. The rear, oh, you don't get a rear, like, integrated rear I/O shield, which, like, personally, I couldn't care less about those. I don't bother installing them. Like, even when the motherboard, like, doesn't have it, like, obviously most boards that I get these days have them pre-installed, but, like, when I install motherboards in cases, I don't bother with the rear I/O shield if it's not pre-installed, because, like, it it doesn't do anything. Like, yeah, like it really, like the only thing it does is it prevents you from like sticking your finger inside the case when like plugging in a USB port or something. I guess you could like stick a USB stick through the rear IO and like drop it inside the case if you don't have a rear IO shield, but who does that? Right? Like why like okay, I can kind of see like yeah, it'll prevent you from like dropping things inside the computer, but why would you do that? I guess it would also make it slightly more difficult for like spiders to move into your system maybe. They'll probably find a way in anyway though. Yeah. And other insects are like small enough that they'll just like fly in through a fan grill or something if they're if they're trying to get into your computer or something. So yeah, I don't really see that as much of a loss. The IO shield is just like whatever. Um, and other than that, it's the same board, just way uglier. Yeah, and with smaller VRM heatsinks, which these should still do an okayish job of keeping the VRM cool. It's not like I don't think it doesn't look like a big VRM heatsink downgrade. Yeah, not really. So anyway, we've got the B650i Aorus Ultra. We've got an ITX board at last. 8 plus 2 plus 1, 105 amp power stages, 12 layer PCB. That's, I mean, not unheard of for ITX boards, but not exactly like it's kind of a new development. It used to be that ITX boards were like 8, maybe 10 layers, and now we're getting like 12 layer ITX boards. What's the connectivity like? Limited because it's an ITX board. Get only 2 audio ports and no optical. 6 Type A's and a 2.5 gig LAN. Wi-Fi 6E. Wait, there's a little daughter board for your SATA ports, and you only get 2 SATA ports. Okay, that's kind of rough. There's a button hiding over here. Is that the Q flash? That's probably. Oh no, Q flash is on the back. Oh, so that has to be the reset the multi key, right? Yeah, that's the multi key. How you're ever gonna reach that, I have no idea. But well, to be fair, it does come with a header, so you could still use the header for that button. 3 M.2s. Oh, there's got to be like an M.2 sandwich on this board, isn't there? VRM should handle a 7950X. Well, yeah, it should. It should definitely handle a 7950X. I'm interested to see how the M.2s are attached. Because there's 3 of them. So I'm guessing there's one on the back, one on the front, and then there's like a riser card. Oh, and it looks like you get 2 M.2 slots connected to the CPU. Oh, but one of them is PCIe 4.5. Okay. Yeah, so you have the front panel card. And wait a minute. So it looks like both of your M.2s go onto a riser card. Wait. There's one on the board. 2 on the card, yeah. So you got 2 on the riser card and like it's not really a riser card. Like you get 2 on the like M.2 board. The BTB plug. Um Okay, well, that's actually impressive that they managed to fit so many M.2s onto an ITX board. I feel like if they fit 3 on just like I think like it looks like they're all on the front here, so I'm surprised that they didn't manage to fit a 4th one on the back with the 12-layer PCB. Actually, how's the memory support? I'm guessing it just tops out at 6400. Yeah, like ITX boards, um, like sometimes they're really, really good with memory overclocking, but sometimes if, cramming features takes priority over the memory topology, the memory overclocking just ends up kind of acceptable instead of like really good. Yeah. Okay, what else we got? There's a B650 Gaming X. Um, just looks like a cut down elite. Oh wait, we're down to an 8+2 phase VRM. Well, this should handle a 7950X quite easily. Because that, like on the stock power limit, that's just going to be 20 amps per phase. And 60 amp power stages really should have no problem with that with, heat sinks this big. 6400 because this is on a 6-layer PCB. What's the connectivity like? Decent. You get what? 7 Type A ports and PS2 ports. You still get 2.5 gig LAN, 4 SATA ports. How many M.2 slots? Looks like 3 M.2 slots. Yeah, you get 1 from the chipset and 2 from the CPU. Everything's PCIe 4, no PCIe 5. I wonder what the price is on that. B650. Oh, we don't have, like, that one isn't on PC Part Picker yet. This doesn't look too bad. Yeah, like, I don't really see anything that I would particularly complain about. You even get the multi-key, which is kind of neat. So, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to overclock a 7950X on this, though you could still do a little bit of PBO, I bet, with this. What else do we have? We have a B650 Gaming X, and then there's the Revision 1.1 Elite, which we've already seen. Wait, there's a alternative version of the B650 Gaming X already? Why? What changed? Oh, AX. Oh, that's just the Wi-Fi version. Okay, so yeah, I think that covers all of Gigabyte's motherboards. So obviously, I like the B650e Master because that's the cheapest way to get a postcode, and like it's basically a X670e Aorus Elite, Aorus Extreme for half the price. So I really like this, right? Like this just you get this feature set at this price point. Well, with the exception of the 10 gig LAN. You don't get 10 gig LAN, but you do get basically everything else. Um, and so that I think just yeah, like the main reason not to buy this board is because this board exists. Um, and then the other highlight for me is definitely the B650M Elite because this is really like this is better than the ATX Elite, at least if you don't need that extra PCIe slot over there. The only real losses are like, okay, so the VRM isn't as good as on some of the ATX boards, but I really like this should still handle a 7950X just fine. Like it shouldn't have any issues. It's a 12 phase. It's on an 8-layer PCB. The heat sinks are very substantial. The rear IO is nice. You know, like yeah, um and then there's the I guess the where's the B650 Pro AX, which Like, basically, if your concern is that your GPU is going to block this PCIe slot, then this board is like feature parity to this, but at a significantly higher price tag. You also get a better VRM and, well, you get more M.2 slots, so actually sort of has more features than this does. But if you don't care about M.2 drives, which I don't, then this doesn't really make that much of a difference. Which is why to me this is kind of the same thing as this, just now we don't have to worry about the 4090 blocking the X4 PCIe slot, right? Um, but yeah, like I think this board is really cool. Because at $190, like, um, this looks really, really good. Just like at the price, it's below $200. It I'm not seeing anything that like immediately stands out to me as like missing. Um, so yeah, like the only concern is that like if you want a capture card or like a 10 gig LAN or something, you're not gonna be able to run a 4090 with this. Though actually, what you could do is if you put this board into an ATX case, you could use a riser cable to run that PCIe slot out some distance, so that then you don't block your 4090. It's going to be like an absolute, janky nightmare, but you could do that. You could totally run a riser cable. Um, you might even be able to squish the riser cable under like a full size 4090. I'm not sure how like a PC like PCIe Gen 4 riser cables aren't exactly cheap. But it's an option. It is definitely an option. Actually, that's kind of a terrible option considering the price of like some PCIe riser cables. Yeah, you're probably actually better off just going for the Pro X in that case. Like if you need the extra PCIe slots, this is definitely the better option. But if you don't care about the extra PCIe slots or the extra M.2 slots, this board is really cool in my opinion. Um, yeah. Um, Oh, it's also on a $10 mail-in rebate. Okay, that's probably why the price is so good right now. But even at $200, like this is a really solid like feature set and just board in general. So yeah, I'm gonna try to get one to actually test and see if it really does like match the other more expensive Gigabyte boards in terms of like memory overclocking, and also to see if if there's anything weird going on with the VRM. But I really like I don't think it's gonna do anything I haven't already seen. And in terms of what I've seen from Gigabyte motherboards already is like, well, the Infineon based VRM on the Aorus Elite AX really has awful voltage regulation if you're doing like static CPU overclocking. But in terms of thermals, this runs a 7950X just fine. So I don't think like thermally, I don't think this should have any issues. Voltage regulation wise is the only part that I'm kind of like, that's the only part that I'm kind of wondering about, where it's like I'm not sure how it does in terms of voltage regulation. But if you're just using PBO, that doesn't affect you. So that's not really much of a concern either, is it? Um, yeah, and then we get like the Gigabyte X670 motherboards, and I really gotta ask, like, why does this even exist when this is a thing? Um, yeah. Like, at least this isn't as outrageously priced as some of the other high-end X670 boards. Because, well, to be fair to some of those, at least those do like dual X8 PCIe. If this did dual X8 PCIe, this would just be my absolute favorite AM5 motherboard. Like, no, like, yeah. I'm quite upset that Gigabyte is hell bent on wasting expensive PCIe Gen 5 switches on M.2 slots, but oh well, here we are. Um, like the board's still good. It's just like it doesn't quite do everything I want it to do. But there are people who, copy files all day, big files, much copying. And for them, having all the M.2 slots connected to the CPU might actually be really helpful. Um, so, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to see if I can get this board for testing, because it does seem really good. At least, like, on paper, this looks really good. So, yeah, I'd like to try that. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, hoodies, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. And I've also got a Bandcamp. If for some reason you want to listen to industrial noise, there's a link to that down in the description below as well. And that's it for the video. So thank you for watching and goodbye.